$20 million are on the line for the richest race in the world. Let's preview the Saudi Cup. Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with a preview of the 2025 Saudi Cup and a full field of 14 runners. But before we get to that, I want to encourage you to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel, whether those are race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, or weekly programming on the Kentucky Derby, Kentucky Oaks, and so much more. So like I said, press that like and subscribe button today. Well, welcome to this preview of the 2025 Saudi Cup. It is a 14-horse field, and they are going to leave the starting gate at 12:40 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. That's always a big question of when is the race actually taking place. 12:40 p.m. Eastern time over in Riyadh, and it is going to be a thrilling race, a mile and an eighth, but remember, a one-turn configuration, so a little bit different from most races that we have here in North America. When they're a mile and an eighth, it's a two-turn race. Not the case there. It is a one-turn configuration that can often lead to a very strong pace early on. We saw that last year with a lot of horses going out up on the front end, but it often opens things up to horses coming from well off the pace. That home stretch seems to last forever. And so it allows for horses like last year, Ushba Tesoro and Senor Buscador, to really track down those front runners as they did to finish first and second last year in the Saudi Cup. Thrilling race. Like I said, full field of 14. Only one North American interest in this race, and that is the number 7, Rattle N Roll. But I think for this, you have to really start with the number 3 horse, Romantic Warrior. And we're going to talk about some of the big names in this race, some ways to think about maybe you're trying to handicap this race and bet this race in a couple of different ways. But you have to start with Romantic Warrior, who is perhaps the best horse in the world. But there is an asterisk, because he is the best horse in the world on turf. He has never tried dirt, and he is trying dirt for the first time. There is definitely some dirt pedigree underneath in his pedigree. But until he does it in a race, it is going to be questionable. He draws an inside post position, which is historically not a bad spot to be in for this race. A lot of the winners have come from post, 1, 4, 5. They've been kind of more inside winners. You've only had one winner, I think, on the outside, coming from post position 12 in the first few runnings of this race. So you can be a little further inside. That's not a problem. But it does mean you might get some kickback if you're not more prominently placed. The question that I always have for turf horses is whether their speed on turf translates to their speed on dirt. That's always a bit of a question mark. I think you saw that with a horse like City of Troy, quite frankly, in this year's Breeders' Cup Classic. Of course, City of Troy, a highly ballyhooed, a highly decorated winner on the turf, coming over, running on the dirt at Del Mar in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and just was an absolute non-factor in that race. You saw the infamous picture of him basically running with his eyes closed, not liking the kickback at all that day. It just felt bad for the horse, quite frankly. But it's one of those things. You don't know how horses are going to take to those conditions until it actually happens. Now, by all accounts, the horse is working out nicely over the surface and over the dirt in Riyadh, and that's certainly promising to see. The surface in general, the dirt surface there, is a little bit different than a lot of dirt surfaces we're accustomed to. It's a little bit of a lighter dirt surface, and as a result, you do tend to see turf horses run better on the dirt there than they might otherwise. That doesn't mean it's always a one-to-one correlation, far from it. But Romantic Warrior is the class of this field. If you just look at the resume, the CV, as we would say in higher education, if you look at what this horse has accomplished, nobody else comes close to what this horse accomplishes. Maybe Ushba Tesoro in terms of winning the Dubai World Cup a couple of years ago. But nobody else comes close to just the absolute breadth of domination this horse has had, whether it is in Hong Kong, whether it is in Japan, whether it is in the Middle East. But all of that domination has come on the turf. Whether that can translate onto the dirt is a big question mark. The other question mark is, from a betting standpoint, are you really going to take 2-1 on this horse? Because that's what the overseas betting markets are at right now for Romantic Warrior. And for me, he's a play against in this race. Maybe I'm just a little jilted by what I saw from City of Troy and the fact that there was a horse that was a great turf horse, came over. And by the way, City of Troy, not nearly the caliber of turf horse that Romantic Warrior is. Okay. Romantic Warrior is a far superior turf horse to what City of Troy was. But still, a very decorated turf horse comes over to the United States at Del Mar and just absolutely does not fire over the dirt. And again, a lot of that goes back to you might have speed on turf, but speed on dirt is a whole other thing. And that's something to really keep in mind, I think, when you're handicapping this race. So Romantic Warrior for me is a little bit of a cautious play against, particularly knowing that right now the overseas betting markets are 2-1. I just don't like that price. Now, if things fluctuate a lot between now and 12:40 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, and suddenly this horse floats up quite a bit once more and more money starts coming in, then I think you can have a conversation about whether or not he might be a good play at 4-1 or something like that. But I don't think you're going to get that at all. You're going to have to swallow a really short price on a horse trying to do something for the first time. There's no doubt he's the class of the field, but whether or not he can do this on dirt is a big question mark. Now, one horse that we know who absolutely can win on this track and who did it last year is the second choice in this race, who might very well go off as the favorite, and that is number 14, Forever Young. He drew the outside post. I don't actually hate that post position at all. The Forever Young, great horse, won the Saudi Derby over this surface last year, beating Bookham Dano. If you remember that race, in the Saudi Derby, Forever Young coming from well off the pace, traveling wide, coming down the stretch, never switched leads, and still managed to track down Bookham Dano, who was a grade 1 sprinting winner here in the United States. So, he can do a lot. He has a ton of talent. We remember that third place finish by just a whisker in the Kentucky Derby. He finished third in the Breeders' Cup Classic. He is an outstanding horse who's already come back from that Breeders' Cup Classic to get a win in Japan. So he's already got a prep race under his belt. This isn't the first race off the bench by any stretch. He's just incapable of running a bad race. He's never finished worse than third in his career. He's running against the best horses in the world as a 3-year-old. And he beat older horses now last time out. He can absolutely win this race. I actually like the far outside post position for him. Why? If you've watched Forever Young's races, his biggest issue is that he can sometimes break a little slow or he can stumble out of the gate. He has gait issues. I actually like an outside post for a horse like that because there's less horses around him to accentuate how bad that break might have been. In other words, if he breaks in the 5 post, okay, if he's where Wutan Sun is, and if he's where Wutan Sun is, and he breaks slowly, there's a potential for the horses immediately around him to pinch him back, to cut him off, and for him to suddenly get a really tough trip from there. On the far outside, El Codigo's breaking next to him, but El Codigo isn't going to necessarily come out on him, or if he does, it's not going to be significant. So even if Forever Young breaks a little poorly, he's got plenty of space to recover. He's a horse that likes to come from off the pace. He's not a closer by any stretch, but he likes to usually sit more of a tracking mid-pack trip, and then he will make his move. And so he's got the entire backstretch to kind of work his way over to, maybe the 2 or 3 path and kind of get into a spot there. And then obviously he's got that long home stretch to just start grinding and tracking people down. He's got more of that grinding running style. Some call him a plotter. I don't necessarily think he's a plotter, but I think he is a horse that does grind away at you and gets better as the race gets longer. He gets stronger as the distance goes more. So I think Forever Young certainly looks very formidable in this spot as a horse that has won over this surface, a horse that travels all over the world and wins, a horse that's now second back from that Breeders' Cup effort, has never finished worse than third, and draws a post position, which I know on its face, if this was a 2-turn race, would be a major issue. With it being a 1-turn race, I'm not nearly as worried about this, and I actually think it can benefit Forever Young quite a bit. Now, there are a lot of other horses we want to talk about in this race. Let's talk about Rattle N Roll. And I want to talk about this horse for Kenny McPeek because, quite frankly, it feels like Rattle N Roll has been around for ages. And he's now 6 years old. And it's hard to believe that, Rattle N Roll, I remember when he was 2 years old and, had a lot of buzz as a potential Derby horse, early on in his 2-year-old campaign and then certainly into his 3-year-old campaign. But this is a horse that has been through ups and downs. This is a horse that at times has looked great and at other times has just looked really bad, like he's lost all of his form. Kenny McPeek has stuck with this horse and has gotten him back into outstanding form. This November, he won the Clark. Then he goes over to Saudi Arabia. He gets a win in the Two Holy Mosques Cup, which is a Group 3 over there, and that serves basically as the local prep. Joel Rosario went over to ride him that day. Joel is going back to ride him on Saturday. He's a horse that can run a lot of different ways. He doesn't need the lead. He's a horse that likes to come from usually that tracking, stalking position. And again, if there's going to be a lot of speed in this race to go out up front, he's going to be sitting in a good spot and might get a nice first crack at some of those winners, breaking from post position 7. I don't think there's any issue there. Rattle N Roll is a horse that right now, if you're looking overseas, you're getting 8 or 9 to 1 on this horse. So there's a little bit of value here with a horse that, again, when he's rolling well, when he's rolling right, he can really run well. However, he is a horse that I will say, I feel like sometimes when the lights are the brightest, he's a horse that doesn't always fire. And when you start to expect him to run well, suddenly he doesn't. He is a horse whose form does tend to come and go sometimes. So it seems like he's in a very good form right now. You're getting an honest price on a horse that's now a winner of 2 in a row and, obviously won very nicely in the Clark, then goes over and absolutely blows out the field in the Two Holy Mosques Cup and, is comfortable over the surface, has been training there, has not had to worry about travel at all over the last 6 weeks, basically, and has his normal jockey, Joel Rosario, up for Kenny McPeek. So there's a lot to like with Rattle N Roll, and it's just a matter of what price you are willing to take on a horse like that. But I think he is certainly a serious contender in this race and one that would not surprise me at all if he ultimately ends up winning this one and can do it at a little bit of a price. I think Romantic Warrior and Forever Young are going to take so much money that it's going to allow for a lot of these other horses to move up a little bit and to be a little bit more of a price in that regard. Now, another horse that a lot of North American fans are probably familiar with is the number 1 Ushba Tesoro. Now, Ushba, as my dad refers to him, he just calls him by his first name. My dad just calls him Ushba all the time. But Ushba, listen, he's a cool horse. Obviously, you remember last year, just coming up short to Senior Buscador in that thrilling stretch run in the Saudi Cup. A year before that, winning the Dubai World Cup from well off the pace. He's a world-class horse. He is 8 years old, and there is a question, maybe has he lost a step? Some of his most recent races have not been particularly great. He finished 10th in the Breeders' Cup. He followed it up with a 4th against Forever Young in that prep race in Japan. So maybe he's not quite as enthusiastic as he used to be. The connections say that he's still training really, really well leading up to this race. I don't mind the inside post position for him, actually, because he's a dead closer. And he's just going to let everybody else run out in front of him. Gate speed's not an issue. Getting shuffled back's not an issue. If he was more of a mid-pack horse, if he was more of potentially even a speed horse, I'd be worried about that number 1 post. Because if you don't break alertly, that race could be over for you before it starts. But with Ushba on the inside, he's going to save all the ground, and he's going to come running late. You know exactly what he's going to do. So he's going to let everybody run out. He's going to be glad to sit close to the back of the pack and be right there in that number 1 hole. He's used to taking kickback. That's not an issue. So I don't think the post position is actually a problem. It's interesting. I think the horses on the far inside and the far outside, the post positions oddly fit their running styles and some of their eccentricities rather well. So I think Ushba, I have a hard time thinking he's going to fire the way he has in the past. He just hasn't shown me that recently. Right now in overseas markets, he's at about 14 to 1. I'd need a little bit of a better price on him, quite frankly. I don't think he's that likely to win this race just because he seems to be out of form and seems to be kind of on the downward path of his career at this point. But you know the horse likes the surface. You know he can run in the Middle East. You know he can travel. And you know he's probably going to get a good pace setup to run into because he's a perfect mile and an eighth one-turn horse because he's going to get more speed to run at as a result of that. I was disappointed by his Breeders' Cup Classic because he got a lot of speed in that race and just didn't really run at it. So, again, a horse that, as the 4th or 5th choice in this race, I'm probably going to look elsewhere for a little bit of value in this one. But that's a horse that obviously, like I said, I know a lot of North American fans very familiar with. Now, a horse that a lot of European fans are very familiar with is Facteur Cheval. And Facteur Cheval is a really interesting horse and a fascinating one coming out of that number 12 post, a little further outside. But this is a horse that has been a long time staple in Group 1 turf racing in Europe, and just recently made the change to the dirt last time out when he finished third behind Walk the Stars and Imperial Emperor in the Al Maktoum Challenge at Meydan. So he's gotten a start over the dirt. The good news was he did beat some nice horses in that race, like Kabir Khan, Generous Tipper, and Clapton. We'll see. I think the biggest issue is his running style tends to be coming from further in the back, and you do wonder, again, taking a lot of kickback, finding the right sort of trip for him. And, I do think that there is going to be a load of early speed in this race because there just always is. I do wonder if he needs a lot of pace meltdown in order to come from off the pace. I think that was a productive first run in that Al Maktoum Challenge, which was a grade 1. And we'll talk a little bit more about Walk of Stars, who I'm a big fan of in this race, actually at a big price. But Facteur Cheval is a horse that has big name recognition in France, big name recognition in Europe, trying dirt now for only the second time. Again, I'm a little bit out on this horse just because of his running style, his lack of experience on the dirt. He's actually currently about 10, 12 to 1. Some places even as low as 8 to 1 in overseas betting right now. So he's kind of like a co-third choice with Rattle N Roll. To me, I think Rattle N Roll is a much better bet if you gave me the same price on those two. So that's kind of my thought. But let's talk about the horse that he lost to, Walk of Stars, who is 6 to 1 on the morning line. I'm sorry, in the number 6 hole, and is about 16 to 1, I should say, in overseas markets right now. I think this horse is an outstanding play. If I had to find a horse that I think presents the best value in the race, it might very well be Walk of Stars. And I say that because this is a horse that's coming off the best effort of his career in that Al Maktoum Challenge, beating Imperial Emperor and Facteur Cheval, including some of those other horses that I mentioned. He's an interesting horse. He's sired by Dabawi, so obviously all that great influence is up there. But he has not missed the exact in his last 5 starts, with winning both times out. Now, here's the thing. That last race in the Al Maktoum Challenge, yes, that was impressive. The effort, though, that stands out to me is the start 2 back, where he beat a horse named Autobahn, and he beat that horse by 11 lengths. Now, you go, Matthew, who cares about this horse, Autobahn, and winning by 11 lengths against, admittedly, basically allowance level competition, maybe listed stakes competition. Here's what you got to know about Autobahn. That is the horse that finished second to Forever Young by 2 lengths in last year's UAE Derby. Now, admittedly, that was Autobahn's first race back since that UAE Derby effort. So maybe that horse just needed a start. But that should tell you the caliber of horse Walk of Stars beat, at least in that race. This was not some tomato can that he beat. Autobahn's a nice horse that, like I said, finished second to Forever Young in that UAE Derby last year. He's got good early speed. If nobody else goes, Walk of Stars is a horse that absolutely can get to the front. And even if there is some speed, he's a horse that can track right off the pace. I think he sits a really nice trip. And if they don't go too fast up front, he's a horse I think absolutely has a big chance. And at 16 to 1, I think presents outstanding value in this race. Again, that's what the overseas markets are right now. We'll see how much fluctuation there is between now and Saturday morning. But that's one that I definitely like in terms of Walk of Stars. Now, I do want to bring up a couple of South American horses very quickly. And we'll get to the other 2 Japanese runners who I think are very serious, Wilson Tesoro and Ramjet. I like both of them quite a bit. But I do want to switch things up and talk about, I think, 2 really interesting horses in this race. And it is El Codigo and Intense for Me. And El Codigo is a fascinating horse. They're both making their first start in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia. They are Argentinian-based horses. They're good horses, and we've seen these South American horses run well in North America. We've seen it with a horse like Dadia. We've seen it with a horse like Mufasa. We just saw it recently up at the fairgrounds last weekend with a horse like Nandadia, winning second start in North America in the Albert Stall Memorial. So we've seen these horses come from Latin America, come up to North America, run really well in big races. These are 2 grade 1 winning horses in Latin America. They're coming over. The biggest concern I have with them is they both like to run, and they both have had success going a mile and a half, basically. And so they go a little bit longer. They go 12 furlongs over there. And it's a long way to go. So while I know distance is not going to be an issue, I do wonder about whether or not they're accustomed to the pace that they're really going to see on Saturday. And it makes me think back to the Breeders' Cup Classic and a horse like Next. Next, who was our best dirt marathoner here in the United States, was a horse that was dominant at 1.5 miles and longer. And yet, when he got in 1.25 mile race, not even 1.125 miles, when he just got into 1.25 mile race, suddenly the pace got a little bit faster. He couldn't sit the sort of trip he normally likes, and he ends up falling back. I think El Codigo and Intense for Me, you could ask the same questions there. Are they going to sit the sort of trip that they want based upon the pace scenario that they're usually probably not accustomed to facing going 1.5 miles? Yes, they both have run shorter, but that was much earlier in their careers. The last several times out, they've been doing this 1.5 mile trip. El Codigo is the one who I think is a little bit better. I know Intense for Me just got the better of him last time out, and they both are relatively young horses. And so they don't have a lot of experience. They could still be getting better. I like both of them quite a bit. When you're looking at the overseas markets, you look at a horse like Intense for Me, that horse is sitting around 33-1 right now. El Codigo is sitting at about 20-1. So that gives you some sense of maybe where some of the overseas markets are on those two. I think El Codigo, like I said, is the more fascinating of the two, breaking from the 13 post. Like I said, the one-turn configuration, that's not a non-starter, when you see that sort of a thing, but certainly Intense for Me, if the horse gets away well, and you don't really have to worry about Ushba Tesoro on your inside, as long as you break pretty well, you could be relatively prominent early and in a good spot. Like I said, I'm not worried about endurance for either of these horses, but it is a question in terms of, can they get into the flow of the race with the pace change that they're going to likely see going a much shorter distance? I think that's a legitimate question, but two horses to at least think about in this spot. If nothing more, underneath horses that are going to be huge prices. Now, the final two horses I'm just going to mention are the other two Japanese horses, which are Ramjet and Wilson Tesoro. These are very good horses. You look at a horse like Ramjet and Wilson Tesoro, and they both are, I think, particularly Ramjet, you got to really take seriously. That horse is 25-1 right now in some of the overseas wagering. Wilson Tesoro about 33-1 in some of the overseas wagering. So it gives you some sense of where they fall in the hierarchy of this field. But one of the things I will say about a horse like Ramjet, he's an interesting horse because at one point he went on a 3-race win streak and he won at Tokyo, Kyoto, and Oi. And he got a grade 1 win, but it was a local grade 1. And it was running in that NAR circuit that Japan has versus the JRA tracks. He's faced Forever Young twice before. He's lost both times. I think he showed significant improvement last time in the Tokyo Daishoten. And that race, I think, showed a lot of improvement for him as he only lost to Forever Young by 2 lengths. He's a horse that's on the come up, in my opinion. I like Ramjet quite a bit. And he's not going to be intimidated by the moment. And this is his first trip out of Japan. So we need to see how he ships and how he takes to the new surroundings. But as long as he ships well, he's a horse that has upside that can win, that's not going to be intimidated by one of the favorites. And I think can sit a pretty comfortable trip, kind of tracking the pace there and potentially even being rather prominent early on in the race. So he's a horse, again, a lot of people will gravitate to Ushba Tesoro and Forever Young for those who follow Japan. Ramjet, though, very nice horse in his own right. Wilson Tesoro, same sort of thing. And Wilson Tesoro is a horse, he's faced good competition overseas. He's faced Forever Young. He's faced Lemon Pop. He's faced Crown Pride. He came over to the Middle East last year and finished 4th in the Dubai World Cup. This is a good horse. This is a really good horse. So I think you're getting outstanding value in a horse like that. You get jockey Yugo Kawada, world-class jockey. I think this is a horse that, again, has run against the best, might not quite be up to beating that level, but man, always runs really well. And if you're including him in any sort of a vertical wager, whether it's an omni bet, whether it's an exacta, anything like that, I think this horse has a really good chance at running a big race because he always fires his shot. And he might not be good enough to beat Forever Young. It might not be good enough to beat a horse like Lemon Pop or Crown Pride, who are both outstanding horses. But he's already shown he can ship across the world to Dubai, run in a grade one against the best horses in the world, and hang with the best horses in the world. I think that's a track record that you like to see for a horse that you're getting potentially 30 plus to 1 on in terms of overseas markets right now. So I think both Ramjet and Wilson Tesoro are going to be somewhat overlooked Japanese runners who could present great value underneath in this race. Where am I ultimately going to go? Listen, I think Forever Young is your most likely winner of the race. The question that you have is, at what price are you willing to take Forever Young? Because if Forever Young starts to just take on a silly amount of money, and let's say Forever Young ends up being even odds. Well, even odds means that the horse is likely to win the race 50% of the time. Do I think Forever Young is likely to win this race 50% of the time? No. So therefore, he's not a good bet at even odds. Now, if he's 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 5 to 2, yeah, that would coincide with my opinion of his likelihood of winning that race. I will say Walk of Stars at 16 to 1 on the overseas odds. That's a horse I'll really have my eye on. I really like that horse. I think Rattle N Roll at 8 to 1 is an interesting horse overseas. I think those are the two value plays. You're looking to upset the favorites. Those are the two horses I would focus on, is Rattle N Roll and Walk of Stars. Those two are really interesting to me. I think a horse like El Codigo, I think a horse like Ramjet, Wilson Tesoro at big prices could be underneath horses to use in your vertical wagers. So those are just some initial thoughts on the 2025 Saudi Cup. I hope you enjoyed this preview. It's always a lot of fun. Make sure to check out all of the other great stuff that we have up on NYRA Bets for this race, all of the other races this weekend across the country and across the world. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.